Welcome to our 120th podcast. Today we're talking about techniques for stakeholder engagement. And what's one thing you can do to effectively engage stakeholders during your change initiatives? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants to explore and challenge workplace issues and to build better ways of working. It's a blend of theory and practice, grounded in real-world experience, working with organizations of all sizes across a wide range of industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want fresh ideas about the workplace, or just enjoy listening to consultants talk candidly about how to make work more effective and more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Rich Cruz, an organizational development consultant, and this is Ben Kleinman. Where are we at? We're the guru, or do you want to be the pharaoh of change management for us now?
Pharaoh. I like it.
A resident CCMP.
Woohoo! Hey, Rich. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Ben. So Ben Kleinman, we have been talking so much about stakeholder engagement, and you just can't get enough of it because, frankly, we're kind of not getting it. And so today we thought that we would talk about actually some of the where the rubber meets the road type of stuff, right? Tools and techniques and all that.
Yeah. No, I love that we've been having this sort of ongoing on and off series about change and engagement and looking at stakeholders and figuring out how to actually engage with them, how to measure that engagement, and focusing on really the measurement and then why we're doing all this and trying to affect sustained behavior change. And so keeping that longer term perspective in mind, I think we've talked about this. It's key. It's super critical. And then how you get there and how you measure your progress is maybe where we can dig in a little bit today, building on some of the stuff that we've talked about over many of our prior episodes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As I was thinking through this, I'm thinking there's so much kind of overlap with what change, where people who are in organizational development or change management and some other disciplines such as project management, such as things like even design, business analysis, where there's the elicitation process of business requirements, and then there's there's a whole part of PMI's, Project Management Institute's book of knowledge about stakeholder engagement, right? And it's interesting, ACMP Midwest, where we're both members, we're looking at doing an interdisciplinary event sometime in the fall, trying to bring in PMI and ADT, the Associates for Talent Development, where we've contributed to some of their articles.
Yeah.
And just some consulting and industrial organizational psychology organizations, right? And it's just interesting that there's so many different perspectives on what stakeholder engagement is and how that works, right? What's your take?
I'm really curious because I think at least from what I've seen in the world of change management, there seem to be a lot of adjacent fields. So change management, organizational development, organizational design, human resources, all of that, it seems like they're very closely bundled. And then of course, project management in and of itself is very tightly coupled with change management and implementation of change management for sure.
Yeah.
Those are so tightly coupled, and rarely it seems like do they ever all come together. The Association for Change Management Professionals, ACMP, that organization recently did some partnering work with coaching, which is fantastic.
That's
I
cool.
see that a little bit more at the sponsorship level. How do you coach sponsors? It's maybe a little harder to do coaching at that larger scale when you're talking about lots of middle managers or lots of employees or lots of end recipients of that change.
Sure.
Coaching can be a little bit harder there. So it seems like there's all of these groups, but I'm really curious what are you seeing as far as how all of them might differ in terms of engaging stakeholders?
Well, if I could start off with the sameness of it, right?
Okay,
Maybe
that's
that's
great. Yeah,
start with that, right? So I'm actually taking some courses right now through an organization, IXDF, which is it's the Institute for Design, uh, for experience design, right? So, and some of the tools and techniques that are there, right? Surveys and
okay.
interviews, right?
Surveys and what was the second one?
Interviews,
Interviews.
yeah,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
But we see the same thing with business analysis, right? Business analysis, so, business requirements documentation,
Very much
BRD
interview
process,
based.
very much interview based.
Right.
Um, even yeah, from a project management standpoint, holding individual interviews and doing some surveys and the like, are oftentimes, the elements that come up in training courses, but also, in practice. And but where I see things differ, right, is how we structure that, right? So from, like, in project management, as much as there's a people aspect to it, right? There's a social and emotional aspect to some extent. It's arguably less a- than what you would probably see in change management and organizational development, where they're the elements to how they are structuring their interviews and how they're structuring their meetings and how they're structuring uh their emails and surveys are a little more pragmatic, if that's the right word, like a little more nuts and bolts maybe than what we would get. Yes, we're not dipping so much into the psychology of people. We're dipping more into just what's, from a resource standpoint, what gets allocated. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm tracking. So there's the what people or other resources, funding, tools, technology, are we equipment, what are we dedicating to
Right.
this effort? Could be a project, could be the change, could be both of them together.
Hmm.
And then that's different from um, maybe how are we engaging with people or how are people buying into the change?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But the one that has struck me as very interesting, because you and I have talked about the arts. We gave a presentation on the arts and change management, and
Yeah.
it being adaptable.
Right.
This the way that designers go about doing structured interviews and surveys and observing how people work with, how they work, right? Just observing how they behave with whatever the product or service is, right? That seems to align more on the change side of things than I've seen other disciplines, right? So the design aspect of how are we going to actually design and implement this, whatever it is, right? Software, whatever, configuration and
Sure. New
customization, all that
process,
stuff,
whatever.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How that gets done. I I just found it interesting that there seems to be more parallels on that design. an artful process than again some of the business stuff, if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah. It's making me think a little bit about software development or developing any kind of technology where you're typically working with one or a small group of subject matter experts and maybe observing them doing what they do in the current state, or maybe having a lot of deep conversations with them about the current state and in building out that vision, or like you said, the design of what the future state looks like, whether it's a new piece of software or a new process, a new tool, that kind of thing. You're thinking with them and eliciting out what it could look like. And then in the agile software development, it's a very, very circular, cyclical process of
Sure.
getting to that and adjusting as you go to that future state, building that new process or tool out. It makes me think a little bit of some of the work that people do when they're looking at process failures or
Right.
compliance failures or redesigning a process,
Yep. Yep.
maybe
Find
because of a
find
compliance,
the root
the
cause
root
type.
cause analysis where you go and you really dig in layer by layer by layer.
Right.
What's going on? Why did something happen? Or how can we change this process to work more efficiently? So a lot of that, the canonical examples are Toyota and Japanese manufacturing in, I think, the 1980s. That became sort of very well known, where people would develop their production lines and everything would come to a stop if something wasn't working right, or if there was a
Right.
failure with a part or a part of the process. They would stop the line, investigate why that failed, and then build in success or what good looked like. And so it would iterate as you go, and you sort of design in high quality and design out failures. That seems very similar to what you're talking about in terms of that design and really analysis work.
Right.
I
Right.
guess when in your experience, when people maybe more on the HR side or the org development side, the human resources side or the org development side, are looking at designing an organization or thinking about, you have an organization, maybe not from scratch, but you have an organization and you need to get it to behave in a different way. So you want to design structures that will help enable that new way of working, that new behavior. Do people go into that design mode and really analyze what does that new job look like and how would someone day to day, hour to hour step through that job? Do they get into that level of granularity and detail?
That's a great question, Ben. And we're going to take a break, and I'll answer it after we come back from the break. We'll be right back. At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So Ben, before we left, you asked me if human resources and how they design the organization and all of that, right?
Right. Since I think you're a lot more familiar with the worlds of traditional human resources and talent development and organizational design, are those disciplines using that real detailed design approach when envisioning and mapping out the future state?
Oh man, I'm gonna give the answer that's just cause everybody to groan. It's the classic. It's
Don't
the
do it.
classic IO psychology. Yes, I'm gonna say it, Ben. It depends. It depends. And what I mean, yeah, I know. Oh, I mean, it just made Ben really, really sad. But
You
um,
must be a consultant. Now you're going to send me a bill.
That's right.
for
That's
4 figures.
that's right. Exactly. Um, so yeah, in my experience and what I've seen and people I've talked to and all that stuff, right? It depends on the culture of the organization, how their human resources department is set up. Like sometimes that human resources section or department is so small or non-existent that
Right, right.
it's moot, right? I mean, you don't have that intentionality, and um, we see that in some small businesses, and then they might even outsource their HR to someplace else, and so there's
Mhm.
only a limited scope to what they can do. And
Right.
so in those situations, yeah, I've not seen this intentional design. And in fact, it's in those cases, sometimes it's very rare that you have people who have the bandwidth to even look at job analysis to make proper job descriptions and all that stuff all the time, right? So,
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
where I've seen it happen more is on the business unit level, from management on the business unit level. And so
I see.
sometimes it's certain departments, sometimes it's certain regions,
Mhm.
it's interesting. Like I had an engagement with this multinational firm, a little more than a year ago or so. And the Canadian operation was very adaptable, stakeholder engagement way up. They had a daily standing meeting with across the departments, right? And when they would have to implement a change, as we were involved in, right? Everybody seemed to be able to follow it, what was happening pretty well, because nobody felt like they were left out of loop. There's we hear about the open door policy, right? But it was really everybody was a little bit cross trained across departments, which was really nice. It was a smaller organization, in this Canadian region, right? All co-located, and but very tight knit, right? They would even have lunches together and stuff like that very very frequently.
Mhm.
So I thought that their stakeholder engagement was superior to what I saw in the U.S., which was fractured and people going out on their own and nobody getting cross trained and everything being kind of very departmentalized, right? And a little more of a hierarchical
Mhm.
structure
Okay.
than this arguably more flat structure. And a lot of it came down to the leadership, because the leader in in that operation, he made himself available, and you didn't feel like he was in the upper echelons, which he was considerably, but he was approachable, and he coached people, like you said. Like coaching, I think is can be key.
Interesting, interesting. So sort of tale of 2 cities there, where you
It
had a very
was,
collaborative, a very, maybe more open and approachable culture, fewer silos, if you will, and then almost the flip side of that, where it was,
yeah,
like you said, hierarchical and a little bit more siloed, not as teaming focused.
right, yep,
Interesting. Yeah.
yep, yeah, a little. I guess you could say a little more on the collectivist side of what you would imagine an organization looking like, right?
Right.
Rather than the U.S. tends to be, it is a gross exaggeration, right? But individualization, individualist, right? Type of workplace, right? Where this was more, we're all working together, kind of on the collectivist side, right? And of course, there's pros and cons to both of those. The What I witnessed there, um, was a lot more knowledge sharing, and people feeling like they were involved in the processes, um, and therefore involved in the changes a lot more than some of the siloed communication that was happening elsewhere.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
What about you?
I have not I have not worked very, very closely with HR folks in terms of designing roles in a large organization. I've done some of that in smaller mid-sized organizations.
Sure.
And so there's been where I've been engaged is there's been a little bit more of a focus on what do we want this role to look like? What do we want this department to or this part of the organization to look like? So there's been that kind of focused effort. We didn't really we we would get into a little bit of the details of what the job needed to do and what the boundaries of the role's responsibilities were and that kind of thing. Of course, you'd need that for building out the job description so that you could hire people,
Sure.
but I don't think we there were parts of it that we would really look at from a, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to walk into this part of the office, or you're going to gown up and get into a clean room and manufacture something in a very sterile state. And then you're going to have it done according to these procedures. So it's all trackable and traceable and sterilizable and all that. You know, this is for a patient device. So it parts of it were very, very focused like that, but it was very intentional.
Hmm.
I think I've worked with other organizations where a little bit more tangentially, I've been involved in changes, but I can see that the HR group has not been as involved. They've been involved maybe in some of the how do we negotiate with unions or what are the regulations for how do we approach this change because there's unions involved in some countries or in some regions but not others. What are the legal stipulations? And that all flowed through the HR and some combination of human resources and legal departments. How do you manage that from a these are the types of steps we go through to engage with union folks?
Sure.
But I don't really recall a lot of that being focused on what does the new job look like? For example, if we're changing what people need to do from a sales perspective or the systems that they use from a sales perspective,
Sure.
even if it's something as simple as we're changing from one organizational structure and people are going to get a new way of rolling up to a different manager, or we're going to use a different system to track our customer engagements and client engagements and see where we can upsell or see which clients are more profit, you know, something that gives you better data in terms of your sales. Um, there's going to be details in how you work with those people in your
Hmm.
sales team to get them to understand the change, what they need to do differently, why, not
Right.
just why they're doing it, but what's the end goal. You know, we're trying to drive revenue or we're trying to shed unprofitable clients, whatever that looks like.
Yep.
I haven't seen a lot of detailed work in terms of sitting with a salesperson and saying, okay, you're going to go into this new system and here's how you're going to go do what you need to do.
Hmm.
Some of that is in training materials, but that's already post design.
Right. Sorry,
Do you know what I
post design.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's post facto. So you're assuming that the change has been made, that people are now ready to learn, that they're on board and they're excited about diving into this new system or rolling up to the new manager. You know, they've had their one-on-one and now they're just ready to go. I guess I haven't seen a lot of intentionality there.
Yeah. Well, I
So it
think this is where some of that design thinking can actually come into play for change. And so
Mhm.
some of like we'll talk about some right stakeholder tools and techniques that have been employed, right? One of the ways that I've done this is to actually observe and like especially with like a sale. I love that you brought up sales, right? Because that's probably been because I've done like HubSpot and Salesforce implementations, Microsoft 365 and stuff like that. Um,
those are all customer relationship
yeah,
management
yeah,
tools.
CRM
Yeah.
tools, right?
Okay.
And so, um, going out on calls with a salesperson or being on the phone with them and taking notes. If you can actually get the transcript, that's even better. Which I've had the ability to do that before too. Um, Not only to see their pattern of how they engage, right, but also then watching. what's the pre-work that they did to to understand the customer and you know set themselves up
For
for that
success.
call,
Yeah.
right? And then what do they do afterwards, right? So did they put things directly into their current CRM, or are they writing it down a notepad, or are they not doing any of it and just remembering what it was, right?
Mhm.
And then asking questions about, well, why did you do it this way, or how, how did you come to this conclusion, and what, how did you find the solution or whatever. That then when you understand, like, let's just say it was Salesforce, right? That they were not using and now they have to use it, and explaining, okay, here's your notes section, here's the information and these fields that you need to put things into. And by the way, you can do this like in real time while you're talking to somebody over the phone, or you can download this stuff from your Teams call and put the notes into the system. Super easy, right? So when you can take what they're used to doing and then apply it, so the as is to the to be, right? To actually put put this into context of what their current situation is, right? Then the change becomes a little easier because they there's at least some alignment to it. It's not always comfortable. Some Usually it's painful. Salespeople hate doing this stuff, right? But I mean, I
Right.
can't. I don't want to say every salesperson hates it, folks, but um, a lot that I've met are like, I just want to sell.
Yeah.
I don't want to do the damn. But
Right. No, they're very interested in that engagement part with the potential clients or actual clients and
right,
just being with people. I think many of the salespeople that I've worked with are very much people, and
yes,
they just want to be in conversation and sharing they it is this joy of what they're selling, and they want to
right,
share that with potential clients, actual clients, and they do a really good job eliciting what is that need that the clients have, what's their pain point, or what are they trying to solve for, and then trying to help them find a solution for that.
right. But even as I don't know if ever told you this, Ben, but I used to work for a music store, Sandy's
Mhm.
Music, years and years and years ago, right? And so that was I started off as a sales associate and became the department manager for the drum department. But it was the salespeople who were the most successful were the ones who now this was this was way back, right? 1999 to 2001. So we had black notebooks that we would use to write down what we did every day, right? So it was a calendar type of notebook, and then sometimes we'd be able to put this into a computer system. But those sales associates who wrote down their notes and somehow cataloged all of that were always able to create and maintain relationships and get referrals, and they became very successful and well paid, right? Um, so that and the ones who didn't, and didn't adopt, um, like me, were the ones who might have become management at some point.
I love that. So he, despite not following what turned out to be a best practice, he still managed to become a manager.
Yeah, I became yes, that's right.
So funny. And do you think it was the act of writing stuff in the journal and tracking what they were doing that helped them just build in better patterns
I think it
with
was
their
have
selling
yeah, and I
as opposed to just kind of winging it each time?
it that's exactly it.
Mhm.
It became a system, right? And they and again, kind of design thinking, right? Like we're trying to figure out how can we make this a replicable process, from a sales perspective, right?
Right.
Which
Right.
then actually was very helpful when in that same job, we moved from one point of sale system to an Oracle based one. That's where my job changed dramatically, and I did my first real change management role, which was moving from this in-house thing to that Oracle based thing. And so um guiding people into, okay, this is what we're used to doing analog, right? How can we put this into digital
Mhm.
so that we're starting with at least rudimentary note taking and sales within a knowledge hub, which was a CRM, right?
When we come back from our next break, can you tell me what metrics you were using to track engagement with that new point of sale system and how you were getting your sales associates to engage and what that
Yeah,
engagement looked like?
let's do that. Let's do, man. All right. We'll
Let's
be right back.
Oh, hi. I'm Hermie, the HR hermit crab. So, if you've ever sat in a meeting thinking, are we all talking about the same thing? I have a book that might feel very familiar. In my third cartoon book, Trust Fall Pratfalls, you'll find a collection of short, funny workplace moments. The kind that make you laugh and then immediately think, yeah, we do that. We cover things like unclear priorities, communication that somehow creates more confusion, leaders who mean well but miss the mark, and employees trying to make sense of it all. It's basically a highlight reel of how the heck did this happen? But each story also contains evidence based, valuable information such as simple ways to communicate better, practical ways to support your team, and small changes that make work a little more, well, workable. You can finish each story in just a couple of minutes and actually use the lessons the next day. Plus, it's a cartoon book, so you can leave it on your desk and be the envy of all your cubicle mates. Check out Hermie the HR Hermit Crab Trust Fall Pratfalls, available now on Amazon. Visit www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com or www.harmoniousworkplaces.com/Hermie. Oh, and if you see your workplace in here, maybe don't read it out loud in the next staff meeting. Make change your friend. Bye.
And we're back. And Ben, you bring up a super great point. Like, how do you measure this, right? I mean, that again, when the rubber meets the road here
rubber meets the road. Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
how do we measure what that previous process was and what was not working to what arguably would
Well,
be working?
yeah. And I mean, you were talking about a really nice example of using one point of sale system and a very manual based selling process
Right.
to a new system and having a lot of the sales at least tracked digitally. And I'm curious what you were doing in your role you were a manager at that point?
Mhm. At that point,
Yeah. So, as a manager, what you were doing to engage with your sales associates to, um, what that engagement looked like, and then also how you were measuring or tracking their engagement.
yeah. And this, just to put this into perspective, Ben, it hasn't changed too much since what 2000, 1999 to 2000 to today, or more recently when I've done um these types of CRM implementations, because
When you say
it
it hasn't changed much, I'm sorry to talk over just to clarify, when you say it hasn't changed much, that's the process of implementing a change?
well the
Or
no the metrics that we're looking at, right?
oh, the metrics. Okay, got it.
Yeah, because it really is trying to get a baseline
Mhm.
of where people are at right now. Like how many, so a big metric was how many phone calls did you make, or how many uh appointments did you set? Um how many notes did you take from those appointments, and how many how many emails were sent, those types of um behavioral
Hmm.
signals, right? Are very important. And that when I was actually going through sales coaching through it was based on Sandler, right? The Sandler Institute. So I had some coaching that I did there, and then I had some coaching from the growth coach. My coaches were actually holding me accountable to, you don't go home until you've made, so many phone calls, so many uh so many um appointments set, right? Those types of things, right? So so that was done back in, like I said, 2000 or so. And then even more recently with a Salesforce implementation, same thing. And keeping that metric for each member of the sales team, right? So that's where some of these interviews come into play. It's also where recording, how people are interacting, right? Which you can get from digital systems. You can baseline that as is, um, and then look at what has changed, like what other behaviors have happened. That's one thing, right?
Hmm.
So we know what behaviors are happening here, but what other behaviors have occurred, right? Have we increased our the channels that we're looking at, right? So now we've got social media, right? Are we using like Sales Navigator now? Um are we using, more email versus, phone calls versus text messages, right? So we have more channels than we had back then. So that's that's blossomed. And then from those other metrics, right? It's like, how many phone calls were we making? Are we still making? How many emails are we still making? Um, how many new LinkedIn connections now are another thing that, you know, that that can be measured, and then you can correlate that to what's happening within the CRM. Does that
In
make sense?
terms of sales made,
In
at the
terms
end
of
of the day,
sales, yeah,
you're
well,
trying
yeah,
to get to
there's say
increasing
there's
sales, right?
yeah, there's certainly sales, which is, of course, I'm talking about all these like engagement metrics, but I mean, really, that's ultimately it. Like, how many people ended up getting converted in the pipeline? That's a big thing, right? So there's leads. How many of those leads get converted to? I'm sorry. There's leads. How many of those could get converted into opportunities, right? And that conversion, where in that process from um, engagement uh, to contract to close to retention, right? Where are people falling off, or where are people, increasing, right? So those are things that I did not have so much insight into back then, when things were more rudimentary and not paper and all that. Today, that's a huge component to having everything digital, and having it,
Hmm.
having your pipeline mapped out better, because you can actually measure that across all of your workforce, or your sales force in that case.
So it's interesting when you're thinking about metrics, I like that you're looking at a lot of behavioral stuff. At the end of the day, are these new behaviors taking root? Are they taking hold? Are they sustainable? And then is that leading to more sales at at the end of that sales funnel? Those are really helpful to track. Were
Hmm.
you looking at all in terms of maybe more of the psychological aspect of the change, in terms of how are people engaging with this switch from one system to another? How are people engaging with their work if they have to now, instead of just maybe sending emails and making phone calls, they're now having to manage different social media platforms? Maybe it's more work to or it's perceived as more work to enter things into a system as opposed to just not jot notes on a piece of paper in a notebook. Were you looking at any of those things?
Back then, no.
Okay.
More recently, I guess that really started to come into play when I was in the association space, Ben.
Uh-huh.
That would have been more like 2017, 2018, somewhere around
The
that.
association. It sounds a little, and we're here in Chicago, so when you say the association,
Oh,
it could mean many
it
things,
could be, yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah,
some
trade.
of those may be a little bit more sunshiny things, and some of those may be more shadowy things.
Yeah, I'm just talking about trade associations, like
Trade
trade
associations.
associations. Yes.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
very much above board sunshiny things.
That's right. Yes. Right. Exactly. None of
Good to
those
know.
shady
Good to know.
associations. Right.
Not casting aspersions either way.
That's
Just
right.
curious for our listening audience.
Yes.
They need
Thank
to know a guy who knows a guy.
That's not me.
All right.
Yes.
So when you were with the trade association,
Mhm.
were you looking more at some of those not just the behavioral stuff, but more of the psycho or the, more psychometric type of stuff, the
Yes.
psychological engagement?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where I started to uh become more aware of this, and hence why I in 2020 decided to go back to school for industrial organizational psychology, because I found that um the psychology of it compelling, and it's stuff that we started to measure, and a large part of that came from the leadership, learning from the CEO there, right, Brian Wallace, learning from him
Hmm.
how he thinks about engaging people, right,
Mhm.
and looking at it from psychological aspect.
Mhm.
So that was kind of a game changer for me, and I was so kudos to the leadership there, and modeling the way, because I think that's super important for engagement.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Cool. I'm wondering, Rich, maybe we sort of pause here
Mm-hmm.
and then we tee up a follow-on episode where we continue this conversation about engaging stakeholders and measuring that engagement, some of the techniques that change practitioners can use on the ground, actual tools, actual techniques to engage stakeholders, but then also measure and track that engagement.
Mm,
And so we've talked about some of that, and we used your sales experience as a nice case study
sure.
example. But look at it from behavioral as well as psychological, and really see if we can come up with some way to maybe generalize it from that sales experience to something that people can take away and think about
Sure.
for other types of change. We've
Uh,
touched on some of those now, but I think maybe expanding on that. Go ahead. You
yeah,
were
are
going to
you
say.
are you thinking like maybe we take this from on a communications channels or basis, and what metrics we would measure on each one of those channels, or is it that and other
I
things?
guess I wasn't thinking so much about uh, a specific channel,
Okay.
an engagement channel, if you will. I
Sure.
was thinking more broadly or maybe a little bit higher level in terms of we're going to engage stakeholders.
Mhm.
How do we do that?
Right.
We have communications, we have training, we have pulse surveys, we have other tools like that. How do we do that? Can we get beyond surveys? Can we get beyond one-on-one interviews to track engagement? And then
Right.
how do we measure engagement beyond whatever we extract from those one-on-one interviews or those periodic pulse surveys? How do we get to tracking engagement psychologically and behaviorally, because at the end of the day, we really need to show that our change effort has impacted our end goal of improving sales, reducing costs, making happier customers, making happier employees, whatever that end goal is. We need to all tie it to that. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, at that high level, can we get beyond the pulse survey
Yeah,
and track
sure,
engagement that way?
sure.
And if we can, what does that look like?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think we can.
yeah.
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
there's
I
there's
think
stuff out there that will help us with that.
sure.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so maybe
we didn't in this episode. We didn't even get a chance to touch on some of the latest technology, besides CRM and that type of stuff. Things
right.
like like Teams and Zoom and stuff like that, and then of course artificial intelligence, which has made a lot of that um, easier to some extent to parse out
Mhm.
and and glean insights that we've never had been able to really, glean before. At least not as quickly and arguably as accurately, right? Because we actually can get a transcript now that actually has here's what was actually said, right?
Right. Right. That you can analyze. And one of the things that I'll build on that I love that you were saying in terms of some of the things you were doing in your sales management example, you weren't looking at tracking how many people opened the email that you sent about we're getting a new system, or how many people logged into a system in a given day.
Sure.
Those are maybe nice to know, but I don't think they're really helpful in terms of are people engaging,
Yes.
truly engaging
Sure.
with a change. And so I love that you were not focused on those. Maybe you tracked them, maybe you didn't, but that was not the primary measure. So
Mhm.
I think we can move beyond just surveys, and I think we can move beyond just tracking email open rates or system logins to try to track and measure the impact of our change.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where I was thinking we could go in our follow-on
I
episode.
love it. Let's do that. That would be episode 122, right? Because we have a
Right. We have a
guest.
special guest next week, which will be super exciting for our
Yeah.
next episode. But maybe after that, we can come back around and just continue this ongoing journey
I
of
love it.
stakeholder engagement.
And the Hermie book number 4, which we are working on right now, is all about stakeholder engagement too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
We got some juicy ones that are building up in there as well.
yeah, more to come. So well,
Cool.
thanks everyone for joining us on this 120th episode of our podcast. Please like, share, comment, engage with us on all the social media platforms that you find us on. And until we meet again, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find all episodes, resources, and ways to connect with us at www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love your feedback. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And don't forget to add Harmonious Workplaces to your favorites so you're notified when new episodes are released. Again, visit us at www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.